We're just giving some time to have more people join us, but I think we should begin so we don't overshoot our time. We intend to have this over and done with within this set time. So good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this session this afternoon. We have our panelists already waiting to share with you from their wealth of knowledge. And I'm excited about the prospects of the session. So without further ado, we'll go right into it. My name is Ugochi Ojukwu, Communications Officer for NULAI Nigeria. I'm going to be handing over to Zainab to quickly give us an overview of the climate justice campaign so far, and then we can go right into the sessions. Zainab. You're muted. You're muted.
Okay. Can everybody hear me now? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zainab. I am Access to Justice M&E Assistant for NULAI Nigeria. And it is an absolute pleasure to welcome everyone to this webinar. Since 2019, NULAI has consistently held climate justice campaigns for law clinics focused on lots of different themes, and basically pushing or advocating for climate justice in Nigeria. We started this campaign as with the theme climate justice is social justice, because we wanted to bring to the fore the core issues of climate justice, of climate change in Nigeria, and how it can quickly escalate into social justice issues, especially for minority communities and local communities where a lot of our law clinics are centered. We started in 2019 by addressing the theme of air pollution, and then we did the theme of plastics in 2021, 2022. So we're really excited to be talking about climate equity in Nigeria this year. This year, the campaign is focusing on individuals, their rights, and their interaction or the environmental health in Nigeria. And we really wanted this campaign to center on a wide range of environmental issues that have constantly affected communities. Oil spillage, water pollution, to improper waste disposal, to deforestation. And that is really exemplified in the panelists that we have for this webinar. So we're really excited to have you guys. We're really excited to listen in, to share this knowledge, to talk about and basically just move conversations about what we can do in respect of climate change and the climate emergency, particularly in Nigeria, within the context of Nigeria, within the context of local communities, within the context of what law clinics can do. So thank you so much for joining, and I will move this back to Ugochi so she can facilitate the panel discussions or the speaker series, sorry. Thank you so much. Mrs. O, over to you. Mrs. Ojukwu.
Hi, Zainab. Sorry, I
Okay,
was
great.
muted. So thank you very much for that brief summary, Zainab. Like I mentioned earlier, we already have all our panelists with us, and going first will be Dr. Kingsley Onu. If you click on the speakers, you can see their profiles, which we already attached to them. We're going to just quickly give a brief summary so as to stick to time. So Dr. Kingsley Onu, give me a moment there. Dr. Kingsley Onu is the acting dean and a lecturer at the Faculty of Law at Adeleke University, specializing in environmental law, energy law, and space law. A seasoned academic, he has supervised research on these topics and teaches courses in environmental law, clinical and mood practice, administrative law, and gender law. Dr. Onu holds a PhD from the University of Ibadan and is actively involved in sustainability efforts. He's also heading a team developing a carbon neutral framework for Adeleke University. He is the focal person for his institution's application for UN Climate Neutral Now. Additionally, he serves as the editor-in-chief of Adeleke University Law Journal and was a NAREP Climate Research Fellow with the Premium Times Institute for Investigative Journalism. I can see, oh, he's turned it off. Dr. Kingsley, I can see he turned on his camera earlier. So I'm just going to hand over to him and he will be speaking to us on, he's going to be speaking to us on climate change and human rights, legal and regulatory framework for the enforcement of environmental rights in Nigeria. Dr. Onu, are you ready? Because I'm passing the mic to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, dear moderator. I'm glad to be here, but for me to turn on my slide, please, I may be muting my video because I'm a bit on transit and I'm just standing by, so it will be difficult for me to maintain the camera on a steady point and also navigate with the slides. So I crave your indulgence to close the camera so that I can be able to navigate well. Is that okay?
That's all right, Dr. Onu.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so we're looking at climate change and human rights for the enforcement of environmental rights in Nigeria. Okay, starting, we'll look at the fact that climate change is one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, and Nigeria as a country is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, such as high rise in sea level, and of course, drought, extreme weather conditions, food scarcity, and of course, diseases. Then Nigerian vulnerability is also heightened by the geographical location of Nigeria, being that Nigeria is located within the Gulf of Guinea, which makes it prone to flooding as a result of high sea level of the Atlantic Ocean. Then Nigeria also at the northern part of Nigeria is located in the Sahel region. And due to the effects of climate change, this region of Nigeria is also prone to drought. So Nigeria is facing extreme ends of climate change, in effects of climate change coming from the southern vulnerability and the northern vulnerability at the same time. And looking at it from a human rights perspective, we also understand that the effects of climate change has both direct and indirect effects on human rights. And when we are looking at the human rights effects of climate change, we are looking at human rights that are affected as a result of the effects of climate change. And secondly, human rights violations that are induced as a result of climate change remedial measures, such as adaptive or such as adaptative measure, or as well as uh, adaptation and mitigative measures as well. These measures in themselves, which are intended to curb the effects of climate change, now result into some human rights violations, such as right to public participation, and even sometimes right to healthy environment, right to dignity of human person, and all that. But looking at the effects of climate change, it has been proven by research that climate change effects affect human rights globally. And such rights include right to life, right to dignity of human person, because where people are displaced due to flood, due to droughts, they are exposed to extreme conditions which are not palatable with the state of a human person. And as such, dignity of human person is eroded. Right to health is equally affected as a result of the heightening effects of climate change. Even right to employment is also affected. Right to freedom from discrimination is equally affected, and even right to movement, right to property are all rights that are affected by the effects of climate change. Then when we look at the legal framework on climate change and human rights, we'll find out that the 1999 Constitution made provisions for fundamental human rights. Although right to healthy environment, which we are going to be talking about later, is not expressly provided for in the Constitution, but Section 20 of the Constitution provide for environmental protection, not basically right to a healthy environment. And as we all know, this particular provision is not justiciable by virtue of Section 6 of Section 6C of the 1999 Constitution. Then we have the African Charter that also preserves some of these rights that are infringed upon as a result of the effects of climate change. As you can see on the slide, some of these rights which have been guaranteed under the African Charter, but are being eroded on as a result of the heightening effect of climate change. Then the principal legislation on climate change.
Sorry, Dr.
Hello?
Onu, sorry to cut you short there. From my end, I can't see your slides. Could you check if you're sharing your screen?
Okay. Sorry, a minute.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Hello, can you see my screen?
No, not from my end.
No, I can't either.
Wow.
I think you have to make me a co-host first before he can share his screen if he's not
Sorry?
a co-host.
Sorry?
He has ability to do that without being a co-host. Can you? Okay.
Zainab, can I just send the slide to you so that you could help me to
yes,
project?
I was going to suggest that. If you send your slides to me, I can project. I can share my screen for you.
Okay. Can I just send it to you via WhatsApp so that you can go?
That's fine. That's wonderful. That's
okay.
wonderful.
I'm sorry, everyone. Sorry, please.
That's all right.
I've sent it, Zainab.
Okay, got it. I'll be sharing that in a minute.
All right.
Please confirm that you can see my screen. So I'm going to put this in presentation mode. Okay, great.
I can.
All right, great. So this is going on presentation mode. Okay. So if I think we're here. Dr. Ono, please confirm if
we're here.
All right.
Yeah. So like I was saying, the principal legislation on climate change currently in Nigeria is the Climate Change Act 2021. But surprisingly, the Climate Change Act, which was made to domesticate Nigeria's obligation under the Paris Agreement, just like the Paris Agreement, is equally silent on human rights. Though we know that under the Paris Agreement, human right was only mentioned in the preamble of the agreement, but not in the operative part of the agreement. Then the same thing also played out in the Climate Change Act of 2021 in Nigeria. The Climate Change Act of 2021 is also silent on human rights, specifically human rights affected as a result of climate change and human rights affected as a result of climate change remedial actions. Please, next slide, please. Then let's look at right to a healthy environment. Right to a healthy environment in Nigeria have had a checkered history, but we need to look at right to a healthy environment from the constitutional standpoint and also from the legislative standpoint. From the constitutional standpoint, there is no express provision on right to healthy environment. In fact, environmental protection was actually mentioned in section 20, which says that the state shall protect and improve the environment and safeguard water, air, land, forest, and wildlife of Nigeria. This provision is not in itself a right, but actually it creates a legal obligation, just like any other form of legal obligation, like contractual obligation, but not a fundamental right. It's not a fundamental right, but a legal right, not a fundamental right. And as such, it can be enforced as a right. Secondly, it also falls under Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which in itself is not equally justiciable. Next slide, please. So anyone that is seeking to enforce human rights, victims of climate change and climate change remedial measures in Nigeria can only do that through the expansive reinterpretation of existing rights under Chapter 4 of the Constitution, such as right to dignity of a human person. These rights can be expansively reinterpreted in a way and manner to incorporate right to a healthy environment. Like we've seen the Indian case of Jenny versus Kanatata, where the court reinterpreted right to life to mean to have right to a basic dignified enjoyment of life, and also to enjoy the full benefits of life. And as such, if this kind of expansive interpretation of fundamental rights under Chapter 4 are given to right to healthy environment, the to existing rights, right to healthy environment may also be incorporated in them, like an expansive interpretation of right to life, just like the court did in the case of Bemre versus SPDC, to incorporate right to healthy environment. However, next slide, the challenge we have in this approach is that this approach is dependent on how imaginative the lawyers that are handling the matter are, and then the level of scientific expertise deployed in handling of the case, and then finally the liberality of the judge handling the matter. Because these ones are, since they are not express mainstreaming of human rights, it will be very difficult for a court to grant such requests if we don't meet these three criteria of, first of all, making sure that the lawyer that is presenting the case is able to make an expansive interpretation of the existing rights in order to incorporate right to healthy environment. Number two, there must be deployment of scientific expertise in proving these environmental rights. And then finally, it also depends on the liberality of the judge that is handling the matter. Then let's go to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Next slide, please. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights is actually the only law in Nigeria that expressly talk about right to healthy environment. And the African Charter have been domesticated in Nigeria, is actually part and parcel of Nigerian law, and is also an enforceable law in Nigeria. So right to a healthy environment is an enforceable right in Nigeria. However, there is a problem with the definition of this right to healthy environment. The Article 24 says all people shall have the right to general satisfactory environment favorable to their development. As good as this provision is, but it has three major challenges. Number one is all peoples, which means that it is actually a group right, not an individual right. And as such, it may be interpreted to mean that an individual may not be able to enforce this right because it talks about all peoples, so it's a collective right in a way. Then number two, general satisfactory environment. General satisfactory, the question is, what is the definition of general satisfactory? What determines what is satisfactory within a given context? And thirdly, favorable to their development. Favorable to their development means that whatever thing you are doing to protect the environment is still subject to the development of the state. And as such, where development and environmental protection are put side by side, or are loggerhead with each other, or where they conflict, it tactically means that development will have precedence over environmental protection. And this will make the whole provision a watery one, and a one that may not be able to actually achieve the purpose. But as it stands now, it is still like the only provision that talks expressly on right to healthy environment. And this case have been utilized, this provision have been utilized in the case of Bemre versus SPDC in upholding right to healthy environment in Nigeria. Next slide, please. Then enforcement mechanism. Since right to healthy environment is also a fundamental right, by virtue of Order 1 Rule 2 of the Fundamental Rights Enforcement Procedure 2009, fundamental human rights were defined to also include rights stipulated under the African Charter. And as such, right to healthy environment can be enforced through the high courts. the same way any other fundamental rights can be enforced through the High Court. So anyone that seeks to enforce a fundamental right to healthy environment will approach a court. But in approaching the High Court, you have to determine the person that has violated your right. For instance, if the violation of the right to a healthy environment was done by a federal institution, then it is expected that you should file your case before the Federal High Court. Then if your right was infringed by, let's say, an underlying individual, you may take up your matter in a state high court. However, where such violation is done by a corporate body or is linked to mineral resources, maybe people within the Niger Delta, it has to do with mineral resources, then by virtue of section 251 and 254 of the 1999 Constitution, it has to go to the Federal High Court as the court that have jurisdiction to handle such matter. Okay, next slide. Then there are certain factors that have been affecting mental right enforcement, especially right to healthy environment. These factors include the justiciability of climate change. The fact remains that climate change claims are very complex. They are not like cases of oil pollution where you can invoke the principles of res ipsa loquitur. Sometimes this issue takes years before they incubate and begin to show up. So it makes it very difficult for people to prove this case, which makes it that for you to prove a climate change claim, then you may need a lot of scientific expertise in this regard, because the claims are not claims that come within the realms of res ipsa loquitur. Then there is also the issue of lack of mainstreaming of environmental rights in the Climate Change Act and the Energy Transition Plan of 2022, which makes it very difficult for one to hold these agencies accountable from a human right perspective. Then the issue of local standing, although the court in the celebrated case of Center for Oil Pollution Watch versus NNPC has actually liberalized local standing when it comes to environmental matters. So lawyers are encouraged to take advantage of this wonderful decision coming from the Apex Court and initiate climate change litigation. Then issue of jurisdiction is still a very boiling matter when it comes to climate change litigation, being that human rights fall within the realms of High Court, and then when it has to do with federal agency or things that border within the exclusive list, then it has to be at the state High Court, the Federal High Court, sorry. We understand that in most states you have only one Federal High Court division, and it means that every form of human right infringement that falls within this circle has to go to that same court. And we have the issue of court congestion and updated facilities in court. Even the lack of manpower are issues that we are facing. Then we also have the judicial attitude, because most of our judges are from the older generation who still believe that the law practice of as it used to be must be the way we have to do it now. And again, they do not also appreciate the fact that environmental claims differ from other forms of claims because it's a unique kind of a claim in itself. So these are actually factors that are militating against climate change litigation. And another factor is the fact that many people do not even know about the existence of environmental rights under the African Charter Act. So these are factors militating against climate change litigation in Nigeria. Next slide. So what is the way forward? Going for the way forward, we advocate that there should be express constitutional provision for environmental rights. Then we also advocate for training and retraining of judicial officers and lawyers when it comes to environmental matters and how to handle environmental cases. Then the issue of jurisdiction and access to justice has to be reviewed, especially when it comes to jurisdiction of court that have jurisdiction to handle human rights matters, especially when it has to do with environment. Then we also advocate for awareness among the people so that people will know that there exists right to a healthy environment in Nigeria and they can equally take advantage of this provision. Then we also advocate for better funding of courts and provision of better manpower. Then mainstreaming of environmental rights in existing climate change laws and policy will also make the government institution to be more accountable and also put corporate entities on their toes in order to make sure that they respect, protect, and fulfill human rights in carrying out their activities. So on a final note, right to healthy environment have had a checkered history in Nigeria. It is still a growing right, and we believe that in no distant time, this right will be mainstreamed and will stand on its own as a right that can easily be enforced in Nigeria. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope it has been a wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Onu. Just to let everyone know, you can leave your questions, use the Q&A button to leave any questions you might have for Dr. Onu. And just like he mentioned earlier, he's in transit. So shortly after the next thing on the agenda, we might have to take his questions. So this is a good time to leave your questions in the Q&A session for him, so he can attend to that in the next 10 minutes. I'm just going to share my screen so you all can see the agenda. So the next thing we have on our agenda is the role of climate education in fostering a healthy environment. And that will be taken by our next speaker, Mujida Ajibola. Before she comes on, I'm going to, like I did with the previous speaker, share her bio with you all. So Mujida is a seasoned sustainability global citizenship educator with expertise in the intersection of sustainability, climate change, education, and social impact. As a Commonwealth alumna, she founded the Sustainability Hub, driving the Sustainable Schools program in Nigeria to integrate sustainability and global citizenship into formal education. In her role as program manager of the COP course team at Care About Climate, she leads the design and execution of the International Climate Policy and Advocacy course, empowering climate advocates and aspiring COP delegates for impactful engagement at global and national climate conferences. So the next voice you would hear is that of Mujida. Mujida, please.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, so I would like to start sharing my screen, but I can't do that if you're still sharing. Okay. So let me see. Just a moment, please, everyone. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So again, good afternoon. My name is Mujida, and I am really, really pleased to be here today. It's not one of our conventional gatherings where we have climate change discussions within the climate change field. So I'm really enthused to be here today to discuss the role of climate education in fostering a healthy environment. So let's dive in. First, I'd like to talk briefly about the broad context of climate education or climate change education, because it's not a standalone thing. It is part of what we call the Action for Climate Empowerment, which is one of the key articles of the UNFCCC treaty itself and the Paris Agreement. So ACE is Action for Climate Empowerment, and it includes all of the 6 pillars that we can see on the screen. It is the 6th article of the UNFCCC, the treaty that established its UNFCCC itself, and it is also in Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. So this tells you how important all of this are, and I'm going to run through them briefly before we come back into climate education. So education in this context basically is talking about climate change education within the formal education system across all levels, multidisciplinary, and all of that, just ensuring that climate education is integrated into all levels of education in a country and across all fields as well. So there's this common misconception that a lot of people have, where they feel climate change education is basically meant for the sciences, and it is not so. Just like we have seen in this gathering, where we have climate change discussions, even in the legal profession and in the legal aspect of academics, it is a cross-cutting concept, which kind of is applicable to all spheres of human endeavor. So I just wanted to clear that common misconception. Then we move to training. Training is similar to education, but it now looks at people that are related to the education system. They are like stakeholders, making stakeholders understand what is happening in terms of climate change and how it relates to the education system. So for example, when we say we want to integrate climate change into the education system, educators or lecturers are not going to do this alone. The academia cannot do it alone. The curriculum is a policy document, so you need policy makers, you need politicians, you need a lot of people connected to the education system, and they need to be aware of what climate change is and everything around it before they even understand why it should be in the education system, how it can also be integrated. So that is what training deals with, and that is also where training of teachers and people in academia come in. Public awareness is quite simple. It looks at the non-formal part of education, talking about educating communities, businesses, organizations, making everybody on the streets understand what climate change is, the drivers of climate change, the effects of climate change, and what they can do to also stem the tide of climate change. Public awareness, like mass communication, that kind of mass literacy thing. So public participation is very important, because it's not enough to get people aware of something. Yes, that's the starting point. People are aware, but they should also be empowered to participate. So when people understand climate change, how do they key into this climate change? How does a lawyer understand that, okay, there's a legal part of climate change that all of us can latch to? How does a medical professional understand that there's an intersection of climate change and health where they can work? All of this as it cuts across all disciplines, and how people can now key into it, because it's not a one-man show. It's not something that even climate change professionals can handle in isolation. We have to work with various stakeholders. Public access to information. I know that all of us can agree that we are here today because we got info that this session is going to be holding at this time. That tells us the importance of information. If people do not have access to information, they don't even know what to do, right? So we need to make information on climate change and climate science accessible to people. And talking about access, it's not just enough to churn out climate science info that has like a lot of technical jargons, or you have the research from IPCC and then you just bring it and say, oh, this is what is happening for this year. Oh, this year is code red. This year is the hottest year in history. And then you dump it on people. No. Information that is going to be used by people or to be useful for people has to be information that they can decipher, they can understand, they can take and run with. They can read, understand, or consume via any medium, consume, and then make a decision out of it. Because at the end of the day, the essence of every learning effort is to get behavioral change. So we need to make the information less technical. We need to make it in simple terms that people, the layman, can understand outside the climate change field. We also need to look at language, issues of language. It's not enough for us to say, oh, we want to do a public awareness campaign, and I go to maybe Karu Market or Lube Market, and I start using something that is very, very, that has very advanced English and share it in pamphlets, or I'm speaking in technical jargons, people will not understand. I'm just going to take pictures and it will not translate to anything. What we need to do is to ensure that people have this information in Pidgin English, in Hausa, in Bagi, and all common languages that have to do with that context that we are having that public awareness at, so that people can understand. And we have to use examples that relate to them, examples that they can see, you know, one-on-one in their environment, and understand that, okay, this is climate change. And lastly, we have the last leg there, the international cooperation. We all know that climate change is not something that affects a particular geography or continent or race or people. No, it's something that affects all of us. It cuts across all geographies, all socioeconomic levels. So we need international cooperation to come together to say, this is a problem that we all have, and how do we galvanize action to be able to solve it? So that said, we'll now move into climate education itself. So we already understand what climate education is, trying to get people aware around climate education. But what makes quality climate education? Because that is also a key part of this. If we are talking about climate education, we should be able to say, oh, this is quality climate education. These are the indices that every credible climate education program or resource should have. The first is comprehensive understanding. People need to be able to understand what climate change is, not in terms of the definition, because this is one of the things that we see when we go to schools. When you ask students what climate change is, they are going to tell you climate change is X, Y, Z, and then they understand the cognitive part. But when they feel climate change, when they experience climate change, do they understand that it's climate change? That's where experiential learning comes in. So people need to understand whether it's formal or non-formal education. They need to understand what climate change is, what drives it, and how they can actually make a difference. When this happens, it's going to be easy for people to have a sense of responsibility. So when I understand that, if I cut down this tree beside me, if I cut down this tree, it's not only that I'm going to lose the mango for next season, right? I'm also going to reduce the ability of the tree to absorb the excess carbon in the atmosphere, and you know, all of that. So it gives me a certain sense of responsibility that is beyond the initial value that I attached to the tree. And that way, it also makes it easier for me to now take a decision to say, I'm taking a stand. I am not cutting trees in my environment, in my compound, in my office, in my school, because I have understood now that this tree is not just for me alone, it is for all of us, and it is serving a greater purpose, not just the fact that, oh, I can afford to buy the mangoes elsewhere, so I'm cutting it off. No, it has a deeper significance at this point. So we are able to make decisions. I'm just trying to use a very simple example now. Another thing about climate change education is that it has to be lifelong. Just like they say that a man dies when he stops learning. That's the same thing with climate change, because it is a dynamic concept. It's quite abstract, especially in this side of the world. We are just trying to come to terms with the fact that climate change is actually happening, and it is not a thing of the West. It's not a thing for the whites. You know, it is something that also affects us, and we're really, really vulnerable on multiple levels to climate change. So it's something that we don't say, oh, I learned about climate change when I was in primary school or through university, so that is all. No, we have to continue learning about it and finding ways to adapt to it. And another thing is promoting interdisciplinary approaches. Like we have seen, climate change is not something that you keep within a specific sector. Every sector is important to the climate movement. Every sector is important to climate change, because there's a way climate change will affect you, your sector, and there's a way your sector will also have an impact on climate change. You know, so we should always look at how to work together with people from other disciplines. Let's bring in the legal perspective. Let's bring in the health perspective. Let's bring in the HR, that's the human resource perspective, and we all can come together and find holistic solutions to finding a healthy environment through climate education. And closely related to that is empowering diverse stakeholders. Educators can't do it alone. Climate scientists can't do it alone. Environmental lawyers can't do it alone. All of us have to come together. The private sector can't do it alone. The public sector can't do it alone. It is multifaceted. So we need to understand that fact and also bring in multiple stakeholders so that all of us can come together and do our bits within our different spheres of influence to ensure that when we have climate education, it is actually translating into a healthy environment and a more prosperous society for all of us. So, how does climate education affect a healthy environment? The first one is increased awareness. And from an article published by the World Bank that I read some time ago, they said awareness is the single most important tool when it comes to climate education, because people need to understand this thing. It's not enough for me to say I'm talking about climate education and I'm just talking about it. If I talk about it and people do not understand it, then I have not communicated. So we need to help people to understand climate science. When IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they are the ones that are in charge of the climate science research and all of that at the UN level. When they bring that information, it is our role as educators to break it down to people so that they understand how it affects them. It's one thing for something to be happening. It's another thing for it to affect me. And the way we say in Nigeria, like, I take consign me now. If something is happening there and doesn't affect me, why should I care? So we need to let people understand this, the drivers, the impact, what they can do. We should also let people understand the urgency of the situation. Climate change is not something that is coming. It is something that is already here. It's something that is affecting us and will affect the younger generation more. And there also should be a balance. It's not something that we are going to say, oh, it's all about problem, climate change is here, and cause all the panic without providing solutions. So we need to prefer solutions that people can take, actionable steps that the person in the market can take based on their own daily activities, and not forgetting the power of individual actions. What we see most of the time is that people kind of feel like they're individual actions don't matter. I said, out of everybody in Abuja, is it the plastic bottle that I don't take, or is it the single-use plastic, the pure water nylon that I don't use, or the one I throw away that will now make climate change happen? Please leave me alone. We need to let people understand that this climate change, it didn't just come like a magic wand. No, it is caused by the individual actions of people like me and you and those that have lived before us. So if you're going to move from this point to a healthier climate and environment, then it is still our individual actions that comes together collectively to make that change. So talking about how to let people understand how climate change education ties to a healthy environment, it's not so complicated, because there's no way, no matter how complicated the scientific info is, you can break it down to the layman. The first is to let them understand the causes. Greenhouse gas emissions, which has a lot of causes in itself, agricultural activities, industrial activities. This you are seeing on the screen is not an exhaustive list, and a lot of it have other stuff inside. For example, greenhouse gas emissions alone, it's a different ball game, but we are trying to make it as fast as possible for all of us to understand, and then try to talk to other people about it. And then explain the process of how these emissions, whether we see them or we don't see them, how the greenhouse gases trap them, and then they come back to warm the earth, how that starts to now harm our oceans, threaten our health, the impacts that we can see around us, the temperature and all of that. From there, you are able to talk to them about the solutions that they can take, conserve energy, saving water. These are things that we do in our everyday lives, and then also need to let them know that this is an urgent thing that we need to take action about right now. So that is that about how we can communicate climate education. You don't have to be a pro, before you talk to the next person about it. And don't be discouraged if they do not listen to you the first time. It is very hard. Change is hard, right? So people will not listen to you immediately. But when they see that you are also walking the talk yourself, and start what's happening in other parts of the world and even Nigeria, nobody wants to die, yeah? So people will start to listen to you. Climate education has a role in promoting a healthy environment through, first thing is sustainable practices. After education, we now start looking at how we can be more sustainable in our everyday life, how we can start saying, oh, no, thank you to reusable to single-use plastic, how we can start using the reduce, reuse, recycle, refurbish, all the R's that we can, as much as we can get, how we can start having local food consumption. Let people going to be bringing a water bottle to work. I don't want to be using the dispenser cups up and down, you know. Somebody might feel like, oh, because your water bottle was brought in from the last COP27, you're not using it to come and do shakara, you know, in the office. They need to understand that one water bottle can serve you for more than even a year. And if you do not use that water bottle to refill your water, you know, imagine the number of cups that we use at the dispenser and then toss into the dustbin. Those are single-use plastics. And single-use plastics themselves, it's not like they are a demon, but we need to understand where they are coming from. We need to understand that plastics are a byproduct of crude oil, and then crude oil from fossil and all of that. So people understand why you are saying, do not use this instead. You know, saving paper, it has to do with cutting trees and all of that. We need to let people understand the why, because naturally for anything, if you don't understand the why, you don't even know why you're doing it, you cannot stay the course. Yeah, so that's about that. Another thing is that climate education breeds responsible citizenship. And if you want a healthy environment, we need to be responsible, not to ourselves alone, but to the environment. I say it all of the time. We are not here on earth as, like, maybe we are even the dogs in terms of the organisms, but we are also stewards to other organisms around us. Yes, some of us believe that we have been granted dominance over all of this, which I agree with, but we are also stewards to the environment. So as much as we have our trees around us, we should understand that we are responsible for the health of the environment. And that means that we should not care for ourselves alone. We should be selfish about our own health alone, but the health of other things around us. Another interesting thing that a lot of us may not be aware of is that we tend to feel like we can use anything anyhow as long as we are fine. What we don't know is that our health is directly tied to the health of our environment. And whatever we do to the environment naturally brings back to us. The trick there is that we do not find the direct linkage between, okay, I burn my refuse today and something happens to me tomorrow. I cannot say, oh, what happened to me tomorrow, you know, the following day is a direct result of what I did the previous day. If we could draw that relationship, then we would take our health and health of our environment more seriously, because our own physical health is also tied to the environmental health. And in terms of that, we need to embrace more environmentally friendly behaviors. We need to advocate for more climate smart policies if we want a healthy environment. And we also should push for sustainable practices within communities. So for example, if we are talking in a community, we are talking about climate smart agriculture, we should not only look at the environmental part, we should look at the economic angle, we should look at the societal angle, the social angle, as we are going to see. Now, green skills for young people. This is like a no-brainer. We know that young people will be more affected by climate change because young people are relatively younger and they will stay for a longer period of time. So young people need to be aware of what climate change is. And that's one of the things that drive the work that we do. We need young people to be aware of what the situation is. Yes, it is not caused by young people, but this is where we are and how do we move forward to make a better future for ourselves and for future generations. So we need people to understand that. And beyond understanding, they should be equipped with the knowledge, skills, and tools for green businesses. Young people, whether in primary school now, whether in secondary school, whether in the university now, it's just a matter of years. In a couple of years, they will be the ones championing businesses. So they need to have that understanding of how climate change affects businesses, of how the emissions that their business generates, how it affects the health of the environment, and how the health of the environment also affects the people in the that they have employed in their business as well as themselves as entrepreneurs. So we need to equip people with green skills. People need to learn about renewable energy. We need to talk to people about climate smart agriculture. We need to talk about sustainable transportation. We need to talk about all of these things that people can also make money from, whether on the short run or on the long run. Then young people can also be advocates, talking to their parents, talking to families, you know, to adopt more sustainable lifestyles, all so that we can achieve a healthy environment. Another thing that is linked to green skills and green businesses are green innovations, renewable energy solutions. We have in other countries, we see amazing things happening every day. You know, people are trying to make biodegradable plastic. There's a lot of research and development going into how to make the world more sustainable. It is not beyond what we can also do and achieve in Nigeria. So we need to start thinking in that direction, and it all starts from climate education. It is when Okay, so let me quickly give you a short story. My son had an experience with air pollution years back, and then he started thinking, because the air pollution experience was caused by him inhaling emissions from a petrol tanker. So he started thinking about how cars would no longer be without emissions, you know. And this was a long time before we even knew about Elon Musk or whatever. At least he existed then, but we did not know about him. And I started thinking of solar powered cars, and it was really interesting. I felt, wow, so this singular experience can make a child start thinking about how to make life easier for the other person. You know, that kind of thing. So this, you never can tell the idea that is in the next person. You never can tell how, maybe that idea is not even completely fashioned out, but you never can tell how another person can pick that idea, modify that idea, and before you know it, the next big thing is coming from Nigeria, all because the person is educated about climate change and how they can also be involved. This also has to do with climate resilience. At the end of the day, what we are trying to achieve is a resilient future where we are able to mitigate and adapt, mitigate against climate change and adapt to the Okay. Okay, so talking about adaptation and mitigation. So how do we adapt to the current changes? How do we live normal lives despite the effects of climate change that are already here? And all of this start from education. It is when you understand this that you can now move ahead, and now it will influence the action for the healthy environment. Policy making, decision making, the legal perspective that Dr. Onu shared just now, they are all very important, because all of this comes together to contribute to a healthy environment. While we are influencing decisions in different climate decision-making spaces, influencing policies in the education sector, in the health sector, in businesses particularly, how do we ensure that people who defy these policies and regulations are brought to book? You know, that is where we need our learned is it learned, what do I call them? Professionals now, they are not my colleagues. Learned professionals, you know, so all of us have to come together to work towards a healthy environment. And there was one campaign during the last election, I think it was maybe, I can't remember, maybe vote for climate or something. So people are beginning to ask questions. And we saw that there was a particular debate where the presidential candidates were asked questions as to what they were going to do with climate change. It was very interesting for me, because we are getting to the point where we're going to be talking to them about things that matter to us and matter to our environment at the end of the day. And we need to let them know that this is an agenda that is very key. So if they're not thinking about it before, they should start thinking about it. And that is the power of the people. That is the power of civil participation in promoting environmental sustainability and a healthy environment for all of us. The last is global cooperation. Like we have identified earlier, it's a global thing. It's not a one-man business. So we need knowledge exchange. Knowledge exchange does not only have to do with advanced scientific education. Indigenous knowledge is also amazingly powerful, and it also helps in locally adapted solutions. So you don't just bring a solution from Hawaii or from South Korea and say this has worked in South Korea, it has to work in Abuja, Nigeria. It has to work in my village in Osun State. No, you should be able to work with the people who have the indigenous understanding of what has been working in that environment. And then they are able to say, oh, 10 years back, this is what we felt. Now this is what we are feeling. This is what worked for us then. Indigenous knowledge is very, very rich with solutions. That is for knowledge exchange and technology transfer. Now we are beginning to have solutions to climate change that have to do with science and technology and innovation and all of that. We need to be able to travel to developed countries and say, oh, we want to learn this particular technology and bring to our country for carbon sequestration or whatever it is. It's part of education. And we need to also adapt solutions. We cannot say, okay, this solution has worked and we are importing it in terms of copy and paste. No, we need to look at our uniqueness of that as a country, as a people, and not even as a country, because the climate in the West is different from that of the South, it's way different from that of the North. So we need to be able to look at local context to all of this and adapt solutions. Global policies and agreements is also very important. This month we're going to be having COP28, where we're going to be looking at international global policies and agreements as regards climate change, and you cannot do that if you are not well educated about climate negotiations and climate change in the first place. Plus, we also look at how it promoting understanding and collaboration between individuals and communities to share what has worked, what has not worked, the challenges you are facing, how are you able to live with them in your own community, and just find ways and also draw this strength from one another and build a community of support. All of this you cannot do if you are not aware of what climate change is, if you are not, some of them are simple that you can just talk about briefly, others you have to go deeper into climate education because you need to get sound knowledge of some of these things before you can advocate for a healthy environment, whether it's in law, in medicine, in education, or wherever it is that you want to work in. So this brings me to the end of the presentation. I hope that you have been able to add one or two stuff to what you already know. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mujida, for that insightful presentation and for the simplicity of it as well, trying to break it down in the simplest of terms for even the most layman to be able to understand it. Thank you so much. I just want to quickly remind everyone again to please use the Q&A button to ask your questions. Some participants are asking that they can't see their mic. You can use the Q&A button to ask your questions. There is no mic for the participants. Okay, so quickly we'll move on to the next thing on the agenda. The whole essence of the Global Day of Action, the whole essence of the GDA campaign is getting our law clinics actively involved in climate issues and impactful activities towards a healthy environment. And present here today, we have one of our law clinics, Akumba Law Clinic in the southwestern parts of Nigeria, who have a unit actually that has been dedicated to advocating for climate justice and environmental rights. So what better time to highlight their commendable efforts. The unit is called Environmental and Sustainability Clinic at Akumba Law Clinic. I didn't get the name of who will be speaking here yet. I was trying to get that, but I'm told the person is present. So please, if you are the one, could you raise your hand, please? That will be, I see a hand raised. Deborah, okay. Great. So she would be speaking. She has 10 minutes actually to highlight the activities of their unit at the Akumba Law Clinic. Deborah, you have the floor, please.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today. My name is Deborah Fakponda, and I am the unit head for the Environment and Sustainability Unit of the Akungba Law Clinic. The Akungba Law Clinic is committed to making sure that social justice as well as can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can now. You went off for a bit, but we can hear you.
Okay, I was saying that the Akungba Law Clinic, established a few years ago, is committed to advancing the course of legal education, clinical legal education, as well as involving students in practical sessions or practical strategies on how to handle matters. The Environment and Sustainability Unit was recently created, was created in 2021, and the aim of the unit is to ensure climate education and help in advancing advocacy against environmental degradation in our immediate community, that is in Akungba, Akokoye in Ondo State. And for our activities for the sessions cut across various parts, including climate education, that enabled us to have an advocacy session in the local community on the need to do away with plastic pollution. It helped us to enlighten the young generation around, and in celebration of the World Environment Day, which took place June 5, 2023, we visited two secondary schools in Akungba community, enlightening the students on the need to beat plastic pollution, as it was the theme for the World Environment Day. And this helped us to advance our cause in climate education. Also, we engaged indigent children in a mini cleanup session that helped to show the importance of keeping the environment free of harmful substances. Also, in our bid to advance the climate change gospel, we published a first of its kind environment and sustainability brochure. The environment and sustainability brochure, compiled by members of the units, contained various topics such as the need for environmental sustainability, climate justice, how to advance climate justice, environmental rights, amongst other topics. And the brochure was made available online, because it was made available in hard copy as well, but it was not printed in so many copies, so that we can be preachers of doers of what we preach, so that we will not produce so much paper that might eventually cause waste in the environment. So the brochure is mostly available online than offline. Also, one of our activities in the unit was to organize a breakfast meeting. We call it a breakfast meeting because it's held early in the morning, where we had professionals come speak to us on fostering environmental sustainability, the nexus of climate change, and the law. So we had one of our lecturers from the Faculty of Science, as well as one of our lecturers from the Faculty of Law, who is specialized in environmental law. So the lecturer from the Faculty of Science gave us the science balance, while our lecturer in the Faculty of Law helped us to create the nexus between science, that is climate change science, as well as advancing environmental justice and environmental sustainability. Also, we had the World Cleanup Day Challenge, which saw members of the unit participate in challenge, such as clean up their environment, are in a bid to advance the cause of the World Cleanup Day. Finally, the unit also worked on a review of the Climate Act of 2021, noting various recommendations and how to advance such policies that would increase the awareness of environmental rights, not just on paper alone, but amidst soon-to-be lawyers. The unit also helped to train law students on how to create policies affecting the environment, which can go on to become useful assets in the future. We also networked with the environment unit of the university, that is Adekunle Ajashi University, Akuba Akoko, to help create policies that would enhance environmental sustainability in the university community, such as creating a no litter policy, as well as creating a ban on plastic use, single-use plastic in the community. We also worked with some non-governmental organizations in Ondo State here on advancing the cause against plastic pollution. We conducted surveys in some local restaurants around and encouraged the use of other alternatives as opposed to plastics. In conclusion, the Environment and Sustainability Unit has taken necessary steps to ensure that the objective of climate education, especially in our local community, is achieved. The unit members learned to address issues of ignorance, which is a major factor or major barrier to environmental sustainability. And also, it helped the students to develop advocacy skills to be able to relate with the local communities on how to deal with environmental degradation. It also commenced an operation in the university community, which is the Operation Recycle AAUA, and it has proved to be a viable process of Can you hear me, please?
We lost you at a viable process of.
The community very much.
Hello, Deborah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Did you get what I said?
Your last sentence, your last closing remark. Didn't quite get it.
I did now.
Okay, thank you very much, Deborah. I'm a witness to the fact that they have actually been walking the talk, especially when it comes to plastics, littering, the no litter policy, and all that. Deborah, please, if you can hear me, kindly leave the link to the brochure you talked about earlier in the chat box. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for your time and that presentation on the unit. So we'll move on to our last, but definitely not the least speaker we have today, and that's none other than Dr. Michael Adani. I don't know, maybe when he takes over, he could confirm the pronunciation of his name to us. I'm not sure if I got that correctly. So Dr. Michael is a lecturer and postgraduate coordinator in the Department of Geography and Sustainability Science at the University of Energy and Natural Resources, Sunyani. He holds the position of Senior Research Associate at the Center for Public Management and Governance at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He is also a research fellow of the Earth System Governance Project at Utrecht University, the Netherlands. I know I didn't get that correctly, but please just let's manage it like that. Dr. Adani, we are super grateful to have you on here and are excited for your presentation. You have the floor, please.
Thank you so much. Good morning from here. I think it's evening there, and good evening
Yes,
in
it is.
Nigeria. Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share my insight on climate change adaptation and resilience strategies in an African context. And so you pronounce my name right. I'm Michael Adani. I'm a Ghanaian based in Ghana, but currently in the US for a brief stay. So I think I'm the only non-lawyer here. So I'll try to make sure that I don't bore you with legal jargons and other things. The purpose of my presentation, which initially I thought was going to be a webinar of, let's say, 1 hour or so. That's why I prepared in that context. But when I saw the program outline, I had to reduce it or scale it down to a 15-minute presentation. So my focus will be on how do we plan for climate resilience for cities in Nigeria, for both cities and communities in Nigeria. The idea is to introduce us to the various concepts and adaptation and resilience options that are available for our cities and communities to ensure that we're able to build livable, safer, inclusive cities and communities that are able to withstand the various shocks and extreme climate events in the context of Nigeria. So this is very timely because climate change is already happening, as the first speaker talked about. Climate change is already happening. There are various extreme weather events, including flooding, drought, cyclones, hurricanes, cold spells, extreme heat or urban heat island across Nigerian cities and communities. Therefore, it is very important that we begin to make plans towards how our societies can adapt to the already occurring impact and effect of climate change, as well as the projected impact. So I'll begin by trying to inspire us with some quotations or quotes. One of my favorite quotes in the context of planning for climate change, resilience, and adaptation is the one by Mamami. He says that if you don't have a plan, it is a plan for failure. So African cities, African government, all of us, we cannot sit aloof to pretend as if climate change is not happening. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has come out with about 7 different reports and several special reports to underscore the fact that climate change is happening and is not debatable. So it is time we begin to plan to ensure that we're able to build resilient and safer communities that are able to withstand climate change shocks. And also Peter Drucker, the popular management guru, has said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. So now that climate change is happening, how do we ensure that our future generations, future communities and cities are able to withstand the shocks and the extreme climate event? The best way is to create it by coming out with the various legislative development, policy interventions, and social safety net to ensure that our communities become adaptable and resilient in the face of climate change. So, like I said, the purpose of my presentation is to enable us to understand the key concepts and commonly used terms related to climate change and climate resilience, and also to understand the linkage of cities and communities with climate change, especially its causes and impact. And lastly, to understand the need for local climate resilience strategy for our local government, our state and federal government as well. So the key concept, because I had the understanding that I'll be speaking to lawyers working, law students working in legal clinic. I think it's very plausible that you are introduced to the whole concept of climate change so that you'll be able to do some in-depth thinking and reflection on how we can best address the problem or the crisis from a typical African perspective. So climate change is closely related to global warming. And global warming is as a result of greenhouse gas effect. So we have been burning fossil fuel, that is diesel, petrol, kerosene, and other petrochemical products. And also we have been burning our trash, which emit methane and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And the use of nitrous oxide or nitrogen fertilizer. All of these are greenhouse gases. And when we emit them to the atmosphere, they suspend there for several years. And because of this, when the ultraviolet rays of the sun hit the surface of the earth, about 50% of it is retained on the earth. That is what makes life on earth possible. But 50% is reflected back. And because of these gases that we have released into the atmosphere, these infrared rays are trapped in the atmosphere and they become heat energy. Over time, they warm the place, changing the climatic variables, that is rainfall, temperature, and humidity, that's the amount of moisture in the air. They change it and keep the earth warm. And this is happening at the global level. That is what we call global warming. And when global warming happens over a prolonged period of time, it leads to climate change. So climate change is multi-decadal. It is not just changes in the weather condition. No, it is multi-decadal in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. So when we talk about climate change, that's what we are talking about. So it's something that we all contribute to because we use fossil fuel. We consume cars as passengers or as drivers or owners. We burn waste. When we burn the waste, it emits methane. When the waste decomposes, when the waste decomposes, it emits methane. When we burn the waste, it emits carbon dioxide and all that. So we all contribute in one way or the other. So there are a lot of things that all of us, including our government, can do to help us address climate change. Responses to climate change basically comes in two options. That is mitigation, reducing the severity of climate change by curbing emissions, or adaptation, that is helping society and other socio-ecological systems to make the necessary adjustment to manage the already occurring and the projected impact of climate change. So when we talk about climate change and weather, what are the differences? So we talk about weather. Weather is a short-term local atmospheric conditions, generally measured on a scale of hours, days, and months. For instance, we can say that it is a hot and humid day. That is weather. But when we talk about climate change, we are referring to the average of weather conditions over a long period. This can be assessed for a single location or a large area. For instance, the region has a tropical climate. That is, we are talking about prolonged period of time, not only a day, not only a day. Yeah, so when we talk about climate change, we have to think in terms of ages. We have to think in terms of ages, because climate change is different from the weather. And so the other concept that we have to understand is climate variability. Sometimes even academics miss the two concepts. So you have climate variability and you have climate change. There are some people who believe that climate change is a hoax. It's not real. And when they explain things to you, realize that they're talking about climate variability and not climate change. So climate variability is basically about the slow changes in climate, showing short-term seasonal fluctuations every year. And this is basically as a result of natural forces. This as a result of natural forces or natural factors. You know, the earth is revolving around the sun and the moon is revolving around the earth. All of these are natural. And because of this, it is normal for us to experience variations in precipitation or rainfall, and also even in average weather conditions. When we talk about climate change, it is the shift in weather conditions that occurs and persists for an extended period of time, typically decades or longer. This is largely attributed to anthropogenic factors, that is human-induced factors. And the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change basically also explain climate change as a change of climate, which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to the natural climate variability observed over a comparable period of time. Because of the shortness of time for this presentation, I'll not be able to explain things. But throughout Africa, we have been experiencing climate variability. History even has it that African basically belongs to three groups. We are Bantus, Nilot, and Nilo-Hamite. I'm an Ashanti from Ghana, but I'm a Bantu. The Zulus in South Africa, the Yoruba, the Igbo, the Shona, the Akamba people, they are all Bantus. We basically were one group of people in the Congo Basin. But several years ago, because of the variability in climate, some of our forefathers moved down south to present-day South Africa, Zimbabwe, and others. The rest also moved to where we are right now, to the old Malian Empire. They came down south to Nigeria, Ghana, and now we have different ethnic groups. And if you read history, African history, you realize that they attributed this movement or migrations to changes in the climate. That is climate variability. So climate variability is different from the climate change we are talking about. And the other concept is vulnerability. When we talk about vulnerability, it's very important. The first presenter and the second presenters, they have all touched on issues that relate to vulnerability. So vulnerability describes the degree to which a human, community, structure, service, or system is susceptible to and unable to cope with the adverse impact of climate change. That is what makes us weak, what exposes us to the various risks presented by climate change. So vulnerability basically includes exposure. Exposure here is about the nature and the degree to which a system is exposed to significant climate variations and or its consequences and impact. Example, slums in flood-prone areas. And the other aspect of vulnerability is sensitivity. Sensitivity here refers to the degree to which a system is affected, either adversely or beneficially, by climate-related stimuli. For instance, there is scientific evidence that infants and children and the elderly are more sensitive to climate change risk because of the physiological nature, because of their physiology, basically. Children and adults or the elderly are more sensitive. And another concept that we have to understand is adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity. This is related to adaptation, but it refers to the ability to adjust to climate change, to moderate the potential damage from it, and to take advantage of its opportunities or to cope with its consequences. So climate change is not entirely negative. There are a lot of benefits associated with climate change. For example, because of climate change, there are certain regions and communities that were not receiving enough rainfall, but now they are going to receive more rainfall to the point of even flooding. And there are communities that used to receive a lot of rainfall, but because of climate change, they are now going to receive less rainfall. So we have to position our societies and our communities, our countries, and even the African continent to tap or leverage on the benefit associated with climate change while reducing the disadvantages presented by climate change. And the various report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change underscore the fact that we are going to experience more intense and frequent hazard and disasters associated with climate change. So hazard refers to the threat of a naturally occurring event that may have negative effect on humans, such as flooding. Flooding has been occurring even long before we started talking about climate change in the 1980s, especially in the late 1980s, when the Intergovernmental Panel was formed somewhere in 1988. And also disasters. Disaster is the negative effect after a hazardous event happens and harm humans and properties. There have been several flooding in coastal communities in Nigeria, especially Lagos, and also in Accra. In 2015, there was flooding in Accra that killed about 150 people. There have been several mudslides in Sierra Leone, in Freetown, in Liberia, and the rest. All these are disasters that has been attributed to climate change. So it is important that we take active part in the conversations relating to climate change. And I already mentioned that one of the responses to climate change that we have to all be interested in is climate mitigation. That is reduction in sources or enhancement of sinks of greenhouse gases. The greenhouse gases that we emit through our various activities, especially carbon dioxide from the use of fossil fuel, diesel, kerosene, petrol, and the rest. And also methane, when we decompose waste, the waste we generate, when they decompose, it releases methane. When we burn the waste, it also emits carbon dioxide. And the use of nitrogen fertilizers, and also CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons, all these, the CFCs basically are through heating and cooling systems like air conditioning, refrigerators, and the rest. If we reduce emission from these sources, then we are fighting or contributing to mitigation. And we expect our government to come out with various climate change laws like Nigeria has done in 2021 when they adopted the Climate Change Act. It focuses largely on mitigation and adaptation. That is good. It is a very good law that other countries, including Ghana, have to learn. And also when we encourage the use of low emission technologies and renewable energy sources like solar, wind, geothermal, and the rest, when we encourage this, then we are contributing to mitigation. And of course, at the micro level, also when we promote changing management practices or consumer behavior to make them more green-oriented, that is building green economies, that will reduce waste. That is mitigation. And the other aspect of climate change is adaptation. I've explained adaptation in several ways. Adaptation also include adjustment in natural or human systems. As human beings, we can make adjustment at the national, state, I nearly said regional. In Ghana, we use regions. At the federal or national level, at the state level, at the local government level, and also at the personal and household level. We can make various adjustments to enable us to adjust to the various impact and risk posed by climate change. And this will ensure that we become less exposed to the harms and risks posed by climate change. For instance, we can relocate people or populations in flood-prone areas so that when it floods, the loss of lives and property will be reduced. We can also invest in early warning systems that will enable us to predict various climate events, to enable us to undertake early actions. For instance, if we receive warning through our meteorological agency that tomorrow is going to rain massively, that it may lead to flooding, then people may stay at home. Or even when they are even going to town, they know they have to come early. When we receive warning that the weather is going to be cold in the next 1 week, then people will buy pullovers or wash their pullovers that they have left for several months. And also to build climate resilient and inclusive or safer communities, there's the need for us to reduce disasters by developing disaster risk reduction programs and policies. This will include set of activities to minimize vulnerabilities and disaster risk in our society, and to avoid or prevent or limit the adverse impact of hazard within the broader context of sustainable development. And to conclude, I'd like to touch on resilience. Then I'll open the floor for questions. So the last concept to discuss is climate resilience. So climate resilience here refers to anticipating, preventing, absorbing, and recovering from shocks and stress in the context of climate change. In particular, those brought about by rapid environmental, technological, social, and demographic change, and to improve essential basic response structures and functions. Most African governments, being it at the federal level, at the local government level, are usually not prepared for disasters. But now, because of climate change, we are going to experience intense and frequent disasters such as flood and wildfires because of climate change. So there's the need for us to build climate resilience. And building climate resilience means that we need to intentionally take mitigation action. That is action to reduce emissions that causes climate change. This means that the various local government can pass bylaws to promote sustainable transportation and the upscaling of clean energy, and also use of an energy efficiency responses to ensure that everybody is on board when it comes to climate change mitigation. And also, we have to promote adaptation measures at the local government level, at the household level. And this requires action to manage the risk of climate change impact through disaster management and business continuity, because climate change is going to affect not only farms, but also businesses. Most African countries have agrarian economies, or economies that are built on agriculture, which is dependent on natural factors such as rainfall, temperature, and the rest. So there's the need for us to ensure that all these businesses, agro enterprises, and the rest are resilient to climate change, and also encourage the building of flood protection and infrastructure upgrade, because climate change is going to be with us into the foreseeable future. So because of time, I'll open for questions, clarifications, and doubt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael. Thank you for that presentation. And speaking of questions, we have Phoebe John, our project assistant here at NULAI. She'll be moderating the Q&A. Phoebe.
Oh, hi everyone. Good evening. My name is Phoebe, so I'll be moderating the Q&A. Okay, and I also want to say thank you to our speakers. You've really done justice to the topic of discussion here today. So I'll just go right into the questions. I'll start with some of the questions which have been answered already by our panelists. So the first question here, James asked, can the government of Nigeria institute an action against foreign companies for environmental rights violation of their citizens? If yes, which court has the rights of jurisdiction? So Dr. Kingsley Onu answered that, and he said Nigeria can institute such action, but they will be jointly liable since the government is the regulator of the sectors. It is better addressed through legislative and regulatory approach. And there's also another question from Obina, who asked, what do you think about Nigeria being signatory to the Zero Net Carbon Initiative? Is it actually possible to have a zero net carbon in the world by 2050? And Mujida answered, she said it's a good thing for Nigeria to be a signatory. However, it would require the political will of leaders to make this work. This is because the need to be sound regulatory frameworks and investment to make this happen. And we have an unanswered question, which I believe the person wanted to direct to Dr. Kingsley, but any of our panelists who are available, Mujida or Dr. Adani, can answer the question. So I'll just read it. The person said, how can the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities be? Secondly, what mechanisms can be put in place to ensure compliance and enforcement of international climate change agreements? And then thirdly, how can climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts be integrated into existing legal frameworks, such as property law and land use planning? So I don't know if Dr. Adani or Mujida would like to speak to the question, or otherwise we can have that directed. We can have the question sent to Dr. Kingsley and he would answer the person privately. But I think it would be great if our panelists can speak to the question.
Thank you so much. I think I'll speak to the last question on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capacities.
Okay.
I think this has been one of the most controversial principles of international climate change law. Because so far, the developed countries, which are also the very powerful countries, have been trying to free themselves from any form of being accountable for their historical emissions of greenhouse gases that have caused us climate change. But going forward, I think we are making headway, especially because of the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, and also developing countries like the group of African negotiators are now becoming more insightful about climate change negotiations. Now we know how to leverage on our numbers and our experts in holding developed countries accountable. But we all have to come on board to push for climate justice at all levels, because this principle is not only applicable at the international level, but also within countries. Within countries, the rich emit more than the poor. Those in the cities emit more than those in the rural areas. So there's the need for us to come out with distributive justice mechanisms to ensure that the rich countries and the rich within countries are able to pay for the adaptation responses of the poor countries and of the poor people in our urban and rural areas. And the next one is climate change litigation. Now, Fiji, Vanuatu, Tuvalu, and other countries are at the ICJ to seek for an advisory opinion on how we can hold states accountable for their climate actions and inactions. And we are all eagerly waiting. The International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea is also developing similar advisory opinion. So going forward, this principle, we will receive clarity on this principle, on especially how we can use it for litigation. And also, how do we mainstream climate change in our legislation? I think one of them is domesticating our international climate change commitment, both mitigation, adaptation, technology transfer, and finance. And Nigeria has already done that. Thus, we have adopted the National Climate Change Act, which incorporates all of this. Now, going forward, we have to intentionally mainstream it into other sectors like land use planning, agriculture, water resources, energy, building, and all that. And at the Pan-African Parliament, they are also developing a model climate change law. This is very important. So I encourage all of you to make to make contributions when they open it when they open it up for comment, because such model law will inform how we can mainstream climate change into our national climate change legislation, policies, and other programmatic interventions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adani. So, Mujida, I don't know if you would like to speak briefly to the question as well. And before Mujida speaks, if you have any other question, please drop them in the Q&A section, and I'll read it out for our panelists to answer. So, Mujida.
Okay, so hello everyone again. I would like to approach the second question from the perspective of the UNFCCC treaty itself. So the UNFCCC treaty is an agreement that established the UNFCCC and empowers them to coordinate actions and policies within countries to ensure that we stay within the limits of our environment as much as we go about our activities. Now, one of the drawbacks or the limitations of that treaty is that there are no sanctions within the UNFCCC itself. So we have countries that are being encouraged to do things. There are no enforceable sanctions that say, oh, if you do not, like what we have in the international finance system, we don't have that in the climate change space, where you say, okay, if you commit to probably lowering your methane emissions by a certain amount, and we find out that you are not actively working towards that, you are going to be sanctioned. An action is going to be taken against your country. That is why it is easy for countries to attend COP every year, year in, year out. They go there, they make climate commitments, and what happens is that we attend COP the following year and things are still the same. Countries go back to their, negotiators and parties go back to their countries and they end up doing the direct opposite of the things they said they are going to do. So when they attend COP, they say they are going to face down coal, and then they go to their countries and start coal projects all over. So I think there has to be a review of that part of the UNFCCC treaty that would include sanctions for countries so that we are sure that we can hold them accountable to the commitments that they make. Another thing that we can do at the local level is for climate advocates or everyone involved in the climate space to work at the local level with their own governments to ensure that we need to keep putting them on their toes to act in line with the commitments that they make at the international levels. Then we can also, as ourselves, work towards understanding what all of these international climate change agreements mean, because if we do not know what they mean, we don't even know when they are being actualized and when actions are not being taken against them. So those are the three things that came to mind. We ourselves should be well educated on these climate change agreements and policies. We need to hold our governments accountable at the local level, and if possible, push for an amendment of the UNFCCC treaty, or maybe a new regulation that ensures that countries are staying true to their commitments, because right now it's all about encouraging them without sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mujida. Okay, so we have two more questions, and because of time, I'm going to read them together, and then I'll give our panelists 1 minute each to answer the question as briefly as they can. So there's a question here from Obina that says, greenhouse gas emissions is difficult because of the growth of industry and companies, which are the primary emitters. Even converting these gases are not as easy as we think. What are your opinions? And then there is a question from another person that says, is it possible to have successful climate change initiatives when our economy is heavily reliant on oil and gas sector? Also, to Dr. Michael, is it too late already to stop desert encroachment in sub-Saharan Africa? So, Dr. Adani, please, would you kindly answer these questions in a minute? Thank you.
Yeah, a minute, I'll try. So the first question is whether we can reduce greenhouse gases. Yes, we can. I'm sounding like Obama. For instance, several years we were using charcoal. We were using charcoal, coal, and the rest. Then we discovered oil. Now we know the oil and the charcoal, they are all not useful. And we have discovered solar energy, wind energy, even geothermal from the ocean. We have hydro. So it's a matter of policy or regulation. With this, we'll be able to transition to these renewable energies, but it requires huge financial outlay. And also, there are going to be some stranded assets. For instance, our modern grids, the one we are using in Nigeria, Ghana, and the rest, some of them rely on plants. Once we start using these new energy sources, what becomes of this plant that we have already invested in? So it is a matter of political will and making finance available. And lastly, I would like to say this. You see, airplanes were using a lot of fuel. Our cars were using a lot of fuel. But because of regulations in Germany, Japan, and other countries, now even the bigger aircraft that are being developed, like Airbus 330, it takes about 800 passengers, but it uses less fuel and it is more efficient than these smaller aircraft that we see in Nigeria and Ghana. It's because of the commitment of government to ensure industries use their best technologies available to reduce greenhouse gases. So it is possible. It is possible. I'll leave the second question for Mujida. Thank you.
Okay, before Mujida answers, so there's a question specifically to you that says, is it too late already to stop desert encroachment in sub-Saharan Africa?
Yes, okay, yes. You see, thank you so much for reminding me about that. It is possible. Africans, we have the technology, but we need the commitment. You see, in China, I studied in China, that's why I did my PhD. They have moved away from soil science to soil engineering. So they have soil engineers who are able to recover degraded land. Now the UN is talking about land degradation neutrality, recovery of degraded land. Desert are just soils that have lost their structure and their quality. So we can use bioremediation and other scientific interventions to recover this degraded land that have become desertified and grow vegetation on them again so we can beat desertification back. But the UNDP and the UN Environment have come out to say that because of climate change, desertification is going to expand very fast. So the Sahara Desert, the Kalahari Desert, they are all expanding. So there's the need for us to quickly build resilient cities and the rest and start investing in how to protect our land from desertification and also from sea level rise or coastal inundation. So Nigeria, your beaches are being degraded and the desert is coming up north, the same as in Ghana. So very soon, if care is not taken, we're going to have a lot of sand at our beaches and sand in our northern regions. So there's the need to focus on that. But yes, we can beat back desertification because the technology is there. Land degradation neutrality technologies, they are there. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Adani. So Mujida just dropped a message. She said she has to jump on another meeting now. So she's no longer with us. So however,
then can you repeat the other question? The other question I left for Mujida so that I'll see if I can touch on it.
Okay, fantastic then. So the person said, is it possible to have successful climate change initiatives when our economy is heavily reliant on oil and gas?
Yes. The good news is that most countries have agreed to carbon peak by 2035. So economies that are relying on fossil fuel like Nigeria, Ghana, Algeria, the Middle Eastern countries and the rest, they have at least 13 years to diversify their economies. That is what Saudi Arabia is doing. That is why United Arab Emirates, they are investing their oil money in other sectors, agriculture, sports, and others, to ensure that when we stop using fossil fuel, they will be able to generate revenue from other sources. So it is time Africans will also do that. There's the need for the Nigerian government to now invest the oil revenue into, for instance, agriculture, cash crops, food crops, invest in education. The rural region in Germany, they were dependent on coal, but they invested in education and now moved the coal-powered economy to a service-oriented economy. IT, for instance, is a huge sector now. Agriculture is a huge sector now. So we have to compel our government to invest the oil money into education, into agriculture, into our healthcare. so that we can transition from fossil fuel economies into other diversified fields like service. So it is possible.
Thank you. Because of time, that is all that's all the questions that we'll be able to take. However, I encourage our participants to reach out to us. If you have more questions, you can do that by following the email thread of the invitation for the webinar, or send us a direct email at NULAI Nigeria. Or alternatively too, I encourage you to connect with the panelists via LinkedIn. I mean, it's also a great way to grow your network. So thank you very much, and bye for now.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. Thank you, Dr. Adani, and Mujida, and Dr. Unu in absentia. Thank you so much for that insightful session. We're so pressed for time. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly move on to close it. We have our programs manager in the meeting, and we'll have him give a few remarks to close up the meeting. Mr. Mahmoud.
Hey, thank you very much, Dr. Adani. I got the name correctly. Mujibad, who has jumped up, and all the other panelists. Brilliant presentation on climate change and climate justice. From the discussion, we get to see that the issue of climate the real issue of climate change across Nigeria or across the globe stems from the impact of activities of businesses, of government, and how it impacts the environment, and to a larger extent, the community. From this discussion, what we glean from it is that it's important for us to really take a step and really concentrate on issues around the environment and climate change. Like Dr. Michael rightly pointed out, people have been considering, but it's easy. Hotter summers, we see colder winters, and then we see flood and droughts across all impacts of climate change. So putting it into context in Nigeria, you see that the farmer had a conflict in the predominantly in the north and the north central, all issues related to droughts within the Sahel region, and then in the western or the southern part, you have issues around farmer clashes and loss of livelihoods as a result of flooding across the state. So it's important what our main takeaway from whole discussion. Yes, climate change is a problem, but there are solutions. We need to work like that's pointed out. We need to adopt multidisciplinary approach addressing issues of climate change and climate justice. Climate justice, essentially, which is to ensure that people have representation. If we talk about representation, people have lend their voice of climate, and then in terms of getting access to justice and then access to resources that they clearly need. So, this builds on education, having people understand the issues and the impact of climate change, so that they make informed decisions that protects the climate and the environment as well. Then also, Mujiba pointed out the issue of training in the sense that every person in different sector, whether it be science, technology, law, humanities, we need to train to apply the existing knowledge towards addressing issues of climate change, climate justice, and then provide a kind of a balance between what we really need to do to the environment and what we have been doing to the environment has affected the environment. Then also there is a need to build resilience and then also culture of the way that we protect the environment. And this can be education, public awareness, and the likes. So for me, this have been the key takeaways I've had from this webinar, and it's a good work what the law clinics are doing on the climate justice thing, and then also the work of individuals around climate justice, especially commitment of government, especially in Nigeria, to push for legislation and set up some provide a secret environment. But like Kingsley or Ono rightly pointed, we need to start looking at climate justice, the human rights issue, way that affects their social and socio-economic and livelihoods. So these are things that are some of the key of the discussion. So in closing, I want to again thank panelists for their time and the rich and brilliant presentation that they have done to add value to this discussion and to our attendees, all the participants. We thank you for your time. Thank you, and Dana, who is he has just started with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mahmoud. You started breaking up a bit towards the end there. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. And on that note, we have come to the end of today's webinar. I'd like to say a very big thank you to our speakers, Dr. Michael Adani, Mujida Abiola, and Dr. Kingsley Onu, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today. Thank you also to our participants. A lot of us have dropped out for one reason or the other, but thank you for attending, and thank you to those ones who have stuck with us till the end. One takeaway from today's session is that everybody's hands has to be on deck, even from your own little corner. And I do hope that we'll begin to make change from our own little corners. Thank you once again, and it's bye-bye until next time.